UFPA for welcoming us here today. It's also our honor to welcome our distinguished panelists, Dr. Mariana De Matos, the visiting professor at the Institute of Legal Science at the Federal University of Para, Professor João Danielsa, the coordinator of the postgraduate program at Law of UFPA, and Ms. Ana Beatriz, a master's student at the program of Human Rights and resident researcher at Amazonian Human Rights Clinic and the head of the Payment for Ecosystem Services at Amazon Investor Coalition. Based on the work that came out of the COP, we are going to present the outcomes and the research and the scientific outcomes that came out of the work of the COP simulation. So let's take a few minutes to delve deep into the heart of the experience through the following videos. The Director of the Strategy Development and the COP Simulation for her introductory remarks.
Good morning, distinguished panelists, dear students and colleagues. Allow me to begin by expressing my sincere appreciation to our colleagues and friends at the Federal University of Para for hosting us today and for the partnership in organizing this edition of the COP simulation. We are deeply grateful for your warm welcome and for your leadership in creating this academic space that brings climate diplomacy, as you see it, live at the heart of the Amazon, which is the heart of the world climate system. Thank you so much. I would also like to extend my thanks to our amazing students who have been participating with such dedication, efforts, your presentations, the negotiations you're doing, your seriousness. This does not just reflect your hard work, but your genuine commitment towards understanding this climate problem and commitment to participating in providing solutions. This is in general and also today, especially in that Alliance and Climate Finance Lab. Moving to the main remarks that I would like to give here, not just in my hat as the Director of Strategy, but also primarily as a passionate economist. I'm an economist, I'm a professor of economics and international finance, very passionate, very concerned about the intersection between climate and finance, and this lies at the very heart of my work. I have long believed that the heart of the climate problem, it's originally and fundamentally a financing problem. I come here every year to deliver the same message in my personal capacity and also part of this, being part of this team of the COP simulation. Over the past years, I have summarized the climate problem with a simple phrase: trillions needed, billions pledged, but only millions effectively spent. This is not just a gap in finance, this is of course a gap in fairness and equality and in the credibility of the whole multilateral system. I would like to brief the problem in a few points in the coming few minutes prior to listening to our students and of course the distinguished panel. Since the Copenhagen commitment, the 100 billion promise, this promise has become a symbol of this structural inequality, that it was not delivered, and the consequent promises and pledges were so much questionable. So where is the problem with the climate finance? In my humble opinion, the problem lies in two dimensions. First is the insufficiency in the climate finance, and the second, it's the wrong type of finance delivered. So insufficient, we have since the pledge of the 100 billion, there are claims, there are of course discrepancies in the data reporting the commitment to achieve this 100 billion, but what the data we have is about 79 billions delivered out of those 100 billion, and they are mostly in the form of debt. The world has promised last year has launched last year a new quantitative quantified goal of 1.3 trillion dollars, like a 300 billion yearly until the year 2035. There is much skepticism about that. That's because even if the target is set, the system is not yet reformed to achieve this target. This takes me to the second point, which is the wrong types of finance being delivered. Wrong in one sense. Wrong in the first that it's mostly debt. It's not concessional. Despite Paris Agreement Articles 9.1 till 9.3, speaking of proper finance, proper concessional finance, until now the most of the finance that was committed to advance with the climate agenda is mostly debt. Please listen with attention to these figures that I will read now. 60% of low-income countries are now at high risk of debt distress. In the UNCTAD report 2025, A World of Debt, they state that 3.4 billion people live in countries that are spending more on interest payments, servicing the debt, rather than health and education. According to the IMF, 19 out of 35 low-income African countries were either at debt distress or at high risk of debt distress by the end of 2023. Borrowing costs, of course, for low-income countries are significantly higher. They are double digits are significantly higher for low-income countries compared to advanced economies. Borrowing costs can be something like 7 times higher for low and lower income countries compared to advanced economies. Despite all this, we still see a climate finance architecture that is mostly in the form of debt and debt-creating instruments. So this is the first angle of wrong type of finance. The second angle is that it's wrong because it's mostly it's the wrong in allocation. So we can see that over 70% of climate finance is on mitigation, which is not the priority for lower, and even emerging economies who need more on adaptation finance to advance their development. So less than 30% goes to adaptation, and only 24% of bilateral climate finance reaches LDCs and small island states. So this is also another dimension of the wrong type of finance in terms of allocation. Compounding all this is the current multilateral system. We see the current multilateral system as a great accelerator towards impeding the efforts done to advance with climate action. This is, of course, clear in the geopolitical tensions. We have wars all over the world. Just around the corner in my country, we have 3 wars running already. In addition to, of course, let alone the war, the Russian-Ukrainian and else. We have a flagrant and spoken out diversions from multilateralism. We see the US withdrawing from Paris Agreement. We see trade restrictions and challenges that have that are unprecedented, very flagrant. We saw even the US president a few weeks ago speaking of the climate problem as it has never existed, and that it's a myth, okay? So this is unprecedented denial of the whole thing and clear withdrawal from multilateralism. We see also the UNFCCC mechanisms are facing more challenges to progress with the Paris Agreement, especially with the articles I have just mentioned, 9.1 to 9.3. These are serious geopolitical and multilateral threats that are just compounding the above challenges I have been mentioning. So we are here, and we come here to say and reiterate the same messages, follow the progress, and have hopes that someone would listen to the messages that we are saying. We say that climate finance needs to shift from loans to grant-based support. We keep saying this every year, specifically for adaptation. We say that debt relief must be integrated into the climate policy. We have proposals in the Debt Alliance and Climate Finance Lab that will be presented shortly. We advocate for adopting climate-adjusted lending terms to reduce the borrowing costs, such as the IMF Resilience and Trust Fund, the CCRT, among other channels. We also call for strengthening accountability in the global stocktake, and we call for aligning the global taxation with climate. I would like to, of course, congratulate COP30 on launching the Tropical Forest Finance Framework, an important and significant political signal that needs recognition and that recognizes the Amazon global significance. But we must be clear, this initiative, among the Loss and Damage Trust Fund and other initiatives, will depend entirely on whether it's paired with deeper transformation in the global financial system. This is the progress with these initiatives is contingent on proper operationalization of these initiatives into a fair and efficient financial system. Without grant-based support, debt relief tools, climate-adjusted lending terms, and predictable multilateral finance, even the most promising frameworks will not deliver. So here again, the TFFF is a welcome breakthrough, but it must be underwritten by systemic reforms that allows vulnerable countries to access finance without worsening their debt burdens. So one last message, our students will be shortly providing their specific solutions and proposals to reaffirm this general spirit that we carry in the COP simulation and my personal view on this particular matter as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sora, for your very interesting insight. We are now honored to listen to the introductory remarks by Professor Mariana de Matos.
Thank you, Megan. Thanks for the presentation, for the introduction. I'd like to start with greeting my colleagues here on the panel in the name of Dr. Sarah. It's a great pleasure to have you all here, and of course to welcome you at the UFPA. So we are really happy to have you here after our session on Saturday at the Blue Venue. It's really an honor that you could make it to the so you can see we speak about when we speak of a university that has inclusion and diversity as its guiding principles. We are the second largest university in terms of students in Brazil, so it's a big university in this sense. And our university reflects the location where it is based, the Amazon. We have special policies for including indigenous and Afro-descended peoples at the university here. It's something that our students, they are educated in an environment that fosters diversity and also solidarity among peoples. So also personally, I'm from Belém, I'm from the city, so I really like the fact that we are living in the blue zone and seeing the environment of the COP30, so you can get a better understanding of what's happening out there for what peoples that are there negotiating with the state parties, what they're fighting for. So it's important, I think, for us to understand the context of the COP and of course of the climate emergency in the Amazon. Thank you very much for being here today. And thank you, Dr. Sara, for enabling this partnership with our university.
Thank you very much, Professor Mariana. Now it's a pleasure to listen to the presentation of our delegate.
طب ما تيجوا هنا Can we?
Thank you.
المايك شغال.
Hi everyone, I'm Camilla, and first of all, I'm just very glad to be at home. I need to say that, like, they come here in Brazil and have this opportunity with the British University in Egypt. It's actually being a very good opportunity, and I'm very happy. So yeah, I'm Camilla, and I'm part of the Alliance in Climate Finance Lab, and our work was focused on rethinking how the global financial system can be redesigned to be more inclusive and to support climate adaptation, accountability, and equitable climate finance. So yeah, before talking about finance and everything, here's our agenda. So first I'll briefly introduce what's the COP simulation, then why create a DAP Alliance in Climate Finance Lab. After that, tensions in the global climate finance landscape, some negotiation frictions, rethinking the global financial architecture, our final recommendations, our final conclusions, and finally we have open the floor for some questions. Okay, so what's the capsulation? The capsulation is a youth-led program organized by the British University in Egypt and United Nations Development Program, where they bring students from all over the world, me included, to simulate roles such as country delegates, chief negotiators, representatives of international organizations, and non-state actors. This year they brought 130 students from 47 countries and 91 of the world. So it's a place where young people like us have the chance to practice global governance and understand how real climate negotiation works. Yeah, I'm definitely applying for next year. Olivia can take over. Oh, yes, and sorry.
Use what the Hello, good morning. My name is Yasmin Saidi, and I'm going to discuss why we created a debt alliance and climate finance lab. So this year at the COP simulation, we built 2 new pioneering labs. The Just Transition Lab, which framed climate change as human security challenges while linking equity and justice to trade, and the Debt Alliance and Climate Finance Lab, which addressed the global inequalities at the forefront of finance, debt, and climate justice, and look to improve and innovate solutions for a fairer and more resilient world. With climate finance being at the core of this COP, we developed avenues towards the 1.3 trillion in NCGQs and discussed pathways to finance and implementation, adaptation, and mitigation agendas. This Debt Alliance and Climate Finance Lab was more important than ever. The lab provided a space for deeper research and challenging debates that reflect the real dynamics of international negotiations. They allowed participants to experience firsthand how competing narratives and divergent interests can give way to shared solutions and policy breakthroughs. The importance of this lab and the discussions will be highlighted by my colleague, Olivia.
Thank you, Yasin. Next slide. Okay, so let's dive deeper into how we built the lab, essentially. So we divided the lab into 3 pillars, or 3 segments, in order to streamline how we wanted to build our progress. So the first pillar is grounded upon more responsibility and justice in debt and climate resilience. So within this pillar, we were focusing on aligning debt relief with resilience to ensure that vulnerable countries are not forced to choose between paying creditors and climate adaptation. Then the second pillar was focused on governance, accountability, and systems. And there we were focusing on making finance mechanisms credible and fast, working on common and analytical, transparent frameworks, and monitoring and verification avenues. And then the last one, we focused on climate finance and innovation. So then it was more looking into how we could scale existing financial instruments, but also add new financial tools in order to mobilize the capital required for the 1.3 trillion NCQG. So then it's important to highlight that there are some tensions in the global financial architecture, right? Because the COP30 simulation is about simulating a potential real COP. And as Dr. Sarah was highlighting before, there are unequal structures. Some that we know are, for example, the divide between the historical responsibility and the current payment burden. We also have creditor powers versus the shared decision-making. So as we know, developed countries often do advocate more for loans, while developing would, of course, look more into grants itself, so we have that discrepancy. But also when it comes to how do we support developing countries that are maybe in debt distress. And then we were looking into debt relief or climate for debt swaps, but of course, since we have the US in the room as well, which it's actually, the US is not currently here, but in our simulation we had, it was very hard to come to certain agreements. But it's important to highlight that these discrepancies exist. Yes.
Thank you, Olivia. I'm Alice. I'm going to talk to you about the negotiation frictions that we actually experienced I had the challenge of representing the USA during the Debt Alliance in Climate Finance Lab. So I was definitely a heavy causer of negotiation frictions to fulfill my role. So we had a lot of tension between grants and loans, debt forgiveness in comparison to debt pauses, and it was frequently between the global north and the global south. So your historical creditors want those debt pauses and not complete debt forgiveness, and they want to give out loans and not grants, where we can see that countries in the global south often need concessional finance that has no strings attached and isn't going to start repayments. So we experienced frictions regarding that in the lab. We also acknowledged the urgent need for small island states and other climate vulnerable countries that urgent need for adaptation finance and how that impacted their role within the negotiations. It was we need this funding now, because they do. And then we have the current US administration's foreign policy. So the withdrawal from the Paris Agreement that Dr. Sarah mentioned, and part of Trump's administration has covered the closure of US international development aid, which is a department within the US, and also the recent shutdown of Congress. Nothing was happening in the US, either domestically or internationally. So, yeah, we experienced a lot of negotiation frictions in the areas you would expect, especially with the USA being represented there. Rethinking the global financial architecture. Currently, the global financial architecture is based on the 1944 Bretton Woods Accords. These were accords designed to help redevelopment after World War II. So we are in a financial system that was designed around the needs of the global north following World War II and their economic and structural redevelopment. The IMF was established from this, and so was the World Bank, respectively, in July of 1944. This was designed when there was 44 states in the UN. There has been 149 more states since that, with vastly different needs than that was at the time in 1944. So what we would like to point out is that we created a financial system specifically for a redevelopment following catastrophic wars. Why are we not creating a financial system which is designed for the needs of the 21st century and the 149 new states in the UN? Yes, I will pass on to my colleague.
Hello everyone, my name is Lujain. I'm a political science student at the British University in Egypt, and I will be presenting some of the outcomes of the Debt Alliance and Climate Finance Lab. So, our core message is simple. Debt and climate vulnerability are now the same crisis. So, as my colleagues mentioned, our lab had three main pillars, and I will be discussing some of the outcomes under each pillar. So the first pillar is moral responsibility and justice in debt and climate resilience. This pillar argues that countries facing climate disasters should not be punished by debt repayments at the exact moment they need to recover. So that's why we proposed the establishment of automatic climate-triggered debt pauses, not negotiated after a disaster, but automatic, predictable, and fair. One example is Zambia, which lost billions in climate damages while still paying creditors, and this makes no moral sense and further burdens the country. Second, we have the transformation of IMF trust funds, CCRT and Debt Relief Trust Fund into a climate resilient liquidity facility. So finance today is reactive and slow. So we suggest linking liquidity to climate vulnerability rather than the GDP, because the GDP doesn't measure the risk. Under the second pillar, which is governance, accountability, and systems, We have the establishment of a borrowers forum, which will be further discussed by my colleague Anne. And then we have the regional and new development banks as catalytic actors, not just as lenders, but we imagine them as co-designers of solutions, technical support, capacity building, and innovative finance. Lastly, in this pillar, we have reforming debt sustainability framework. So the current DSA's debt sustainability assessments ignore climate shocks. A country can be sustainable on paper, but it has on a way to collapse. And the third pillar, we have a standardized debt for climate swaps. So we propose the establishment of a debt for climate swaps. Instead of an ad hoc deals, we need a global standardized framework where developing countries gain fiscal space and creditors contribute towards the promised $1.3 trillion climate finance goal. Second, we have a global carbon taxation framework with a UN supervised AI registry. High emission sectors must start paying their real costs, revenues, and revenues will be directed towards a global climate transition fund. Lastly, we have enhanced UNFCCC support for SIDS and LDCs. We push for simplified access for climate finance, faster approvals, and stronger project preparation, and better monitoring capabilities. Thank you. Now I will leave the floor to my colleague Anne to further discuss the borrowers forum.
Thank you. So I'll talk a bit about the Borrowers Forum. So apologies, it doesn't look like we captured the updated slide, but we have the Borrowers Forum, which has been suggested under Pillar 2 of governance. So what the Borrowers Forum is as a response to some of the creditor nations that have come together and formed something called the Paris Club. So what the Paris Club does is that they come together, they align on positions, and they are able to determine what kind of, they have sophisticated analytical tools, they have shared intelligence on the nations that are coming to get debt from them. And so they're able to determine what presidents they're going to give the different countries, what leverage they're going to use, and what terms they're going to offer to some of these countries. So in contrast, we have the developing nations and the debtor nations that come, and they're negotiating individually, and they don't have the similar sophisticated tools like we do with the creditor nations. So as they're approaching the Paris Club, then the Paris Club has complete information about every deal that the debtor nations have made, while the debtor nations are only operating on like spreadsheets and hope. So there's a power imbalance that exists right now with the creditor nations and the developing nations. And so part of the proposed mechanisms that we have were 3 digital infrastructure mechanisms. So the first one was enhanced coordination. So similar to how the Paris Club moves, where they coordinate positions, we are calling for the digital coordination of the developing nations. So how that would work is, like maybe right now you have like a country like Egypt coming to prepare for debt restructuring conversations with the creditor nations, to the Paris Club. And so you have like maybe a couple of months later, you have a country like Mozambique that has these same talks, but they're starting from scratch. And then maybe you have Tunisia also coming in to negotiate, but they don't have any understanding of the terms that Egypt was able to secure. And so having the enhanced coordination platform would allow all of these countries to align on positions, to share like whatever negotiation precedents work, and to even like coordinate responses before these multilateral negotiations are happening. So they can get to consult on, consult with each other, like what terms did you get as a country, what arguments worked for you, what leverages worked for you. So that would be a big jump into how the negotiations and restructurings are done. So the second proposed infrastructure mechanism would be to address the technology gap. So you find organizations like the IMF or the Paris Club are using AI and machine learning, and they are analyzing debt sustainability, they are predicting default risks, they're looking at climate vulnerabilities, they're able to have predictive models that are looking at how some of the climate vulnerabilities that might exist. So on the other hand, you have developing nations and data nations, and maybe they're just working with spreadsheets. So, or consultants, hiring expensive consultants, and these same consultants are the ones that are working for the creditor funds as well. So, some of the proposed tools that would fall under this second mechanism would be creating similar AI and machine learning tools that can be able to analyze for the data nations. So even taking into account things like climate shocks, because traditional debt analysis right now does not take into consideration climate shocks. So now that means by the time data nations are walking into negotiation tables, they have data to back them up. So if a nation is telling the Paris Club that this debt is not sustainable, or that if we do not receive debt relief, we are going to default within 18 months based off of what the predictive models are showing, then it's not just seen as self-serving, but it's negotiation that is actually based on evidence and not on like a power-based. So it closes that analytical gap that we currently have. Then the third proposed digital infrastructure mechanism would be to have a searchable repository. So that would mean that all the historical debt agreements that have existed within these data nations are made available. So for instance, let's say Mozambique is going into negotiations for debt relief. So they've been offered maybe a 10-year extension maturity, 5% reduction in interest rates, and no principal forgiveness. So when a negotiator is going on behalf of Mozambique, they have they don't have anything to compare it to. They don't know if this is a good deal or not. But when we have like a searchable repository, they can actually be able to look and see examples of countries like Ecuador that have received debt for nature swaps, countries like Belize that have received like 55% in principal forgiveness, and they can actually see that this is not equitable, and they can negotiate for a better term. So instead of creditor nations giving wildly different terms or like favoring certain countries politically, we would have like a comparable positions, a standard that takes into account the standing position of each country. So lastly, as was mentioned in Pillar 2, we would like to enforce this through the UNFCCC in coordination with the regional development banks offering catalytic support. This is because, as has been mentioned before, we don't feel that debt is actually a climate problem, because we have countries that are spending 30 to 40% of government revenue to service debt, so they cannot actually set aside any money for climate adaptation. In addition to this, there is the Paris Agreement, Article 10, that talks about technology transfer, and this actually develops nations that committed to operationalize this technology transfer so that they can empower developing nations to develop technology that works in their favor when it comes to climate action. So we believe that this would be able to contribute to unlock climate finance eligibility. Thank you.
Finish up with some concluding remarks before opening the floor to questions. So, the Debt Alliance and Climate Finance Lab demonstrate that meaningful reform begins where justice and practicality meet. By linking debt relief to climate resilience, the lab reframed finance as a tool for shared survival, not national burden. It proved that youth-led diplomacy can move beyond symbolism fair, inclusive, and trackable solutions that transform global ambition into actionable policy. Ultimately, this work envisions a rebalanced financial architecture, one that aligns moral responsibility, innovation, and equity to meet the world's 1.3 trillion climate finance goal. Thank you very much for listening. We will now open the floor.
Thank you very much to our delegates. Now it's a pleasure and honor to listen to the insights of Professor João Daniel.
Hello, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and I'm really happy to know each other. On behalf of the Federal University of Art and on behalf of the Post-Graduation Program in Law, I would like to say welcome to you and to say that we are really looking for an agenda to work together with all the partners universities. I'm speaking now on behalf of the program as the coordinator of the post-graduation program. So my name is João Daniel Sá. I'm a professor in law. I work as a professor in Federal University in both sides of the undergrad school and the post-graduation school as the coordinator of the program. And I'm gonna give some words about our work. We have, as Professor Mariana said, really a commitment with the Amazonian legal research. That's our main goal in the research field. We have 2 decades of excellence. During this time, we had the opportunity to develop and to work in different fields related to the program. And from now, we have more than 40 professors working together and more than 200 students working together. That's a number. That's a huge number, and we're still growing this number. As Professor Mariana said, we are one of the biggest universities in Brazil, and we have in relation to law, I think this is the only program that has the highest grade in evaluation system of Brazil. Considering, taking into consideration the kind of exams we have to do to get the grades in relation to the program. That's important because it allows us to get access to the funding process, to receive students, to send students, to work together with professors, PhDs, and this is really important for us. The internationalization process that I think we are going to reach together, maybe. So we are really looking to connect teaching and research, partnerships with governments, engagement with traditional communities is really important for us. Collaboration with social organizations, and to have a dialogue with the productive sectors also. I decided to work on a different field to give you something new, because sometimes we on COP we are listening to some speeches that are almost repeating what we are working on. So maybe you know more than me about COP30, because I'm still working on it. So I'm trying to give you a different sense of view. I'm going to speak about territory in the Amazon, because this is really important for what we are going to address in the second part, that's financing. So we have a problem that I'm dividing in four situations. We have an essential goal to reach climate equilibrium and carbon regulation. Okay, everybody agrees to that. But we still have political tensions, economic disputes, and social conflicts. And that's in the sense we have to talk about territory. Because the climate policies in Amazon, they are fundamentally about economy and sovereignty. And we have to discuss this in relation to territorial rights, about indigenous communities, about local communities, about Quilombola communities also. So this requires us to examine two dimensions. The first one is land tenure governance, and the second one is the climate finance. When we talk about land tenure, I'm not talking just about the administrative tension we have here. I'm talking about unclear ownership of the land. We are talking about multiple territories. We are talking about climate impact, and we are talking about some projects that are really fragile because the stakeholders need to have legal certainty for what they are supporting the projects. And when you don't know who owns the land, you don't know to the person or to the people, you have to address the questions to discuss the problems related to products that will maintain the forest or to cure us from deforestation. So that's the main point for us. The second question, and I'm going to finish just a quick speech, is related to climate finance. And I'm really happy to know Dr. Sarah, because she's a specialist. She's an economist. I'm just a lawyer and a professor in law. So yes. So I think the best thing I can do for you now is talk a little bit about the tropical forest for facility launch, because it's new. And maybe I know a little bit that I can contribute in the discussion. So that's a new framework. That's a Brazil proposal. We have a challenge in relation to implementation. And the model was designed in something like this. I will try to resume it. We have governments and private investors contributing resources. We have some targets. We are trying to reach a number. We have 125 billions divided into public and private donations. We are developing an investment strategy. So TFEI invests capital in low-risk, long-term bonds. So it's an investment to receive annual rents. So the investment returns generates stable annual flows for, and that's the point, for forest conservation payments. So it's a model that's promising that everybody will gain in the process. They are presenting a kind of performance verification. So an independent monitoring via satellite data and forest inventories to validate the conserved forests. And the results are based on payments for environmental services. That's the model. Countries will receive annual payments per hectare, a minimum 20% directly to indigenous people and traditional communities. That's the promise. And the promise is that it will work on a cycle, going back to the beginning and flowing the process. But we have some issues in relation to some consensus at COP30. And one of the issues Professor Sarah said is climate finance. So in relation to climate finance, we need to establish predictable, scalable resource flows for mitigation, for adaptation, for loss and damage, and just transition. Those are the main goals. Everybody at COP is working on that. We have the gap between pledges and disbursements, and this COP needs to advance in scale, in predictability, and to get direct access. I will not enter on the other points, but it's really good, it's really important to stress that Brazil is working on carbon markers, also on NDC ambitions and information integrity. I hope that we can get some results on those 4 fields. And going to conclude, I would say we have a main challenge that is governance and credibility in relation to COP and also in relation to the Brazil proposal. Countries and investors have not reached an agreement on monitoring metrics, verification rules, access to funds, environmental integrity safeguards, and social environmental protections. And without consensus, we cannot go and move forward. In relation to Pará, the state of Pará, that's a region in Brazil that you are now with me, we are working on negotiation, but we are looking for implementation. So those are the essential pillars we are looking to move. We have already a robust institutional capacity. The state and municipal institutions, they are developing technical structures, transparency protocols, reliable inventories, and emissions accounting to be able to get access to funding. We also are working on participatory governance. As I said, engaging the local communities is really important for us. I'm talking about indigenous people, traditional communities, rural producers, and the society. And the last but not the least is legal certainty. For me as a lawyer, that's really important. We need to attract private investments and ensure predictability. Parás environmental legislation is a huge and big framework to work on this side. But we must need to be aligned with the federal policies and the international policies. And to conclude, I would say that we are facing not just only a juridical question or an economic question, but it's also a moral question or a philosophical question, as you can say. Because we are working on a framework that will decide who pays for what has been destroyed and for what still must be protected. And I'm transforming this statement in a question, so that's the question we have to answer. And if we are able to answer this question, maybe we can define the framework for financing climate change. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor. Now it's our pleasure to listen to the remarks and insights of Rosanna Beatriz.
Hi everybody, good morning. I'm Ana Beatriz Freitas. As everybody explained before, I am a master's student here in the human rights program at the University of Pará. Now, I'm also a research resident at the Amazon Human Rights Clinic. I'm sorry I don't have a presentation. I was very much really just up to the thing. So, but I would like to thank you all for the work that you guys are doing. You have a lot of interesting recommendations and expertise in the economic area that goes really way beyond everything that I saw before. So congratulations on the work that the lab is doing. About the specificities of the climate finance, I especially think that some points of view are really well seen in the Amazonian reality. And as an Amazonian, I need to bring this strategy so everybody can understand how this global frameworks in those top-down regimes achieve the region. First, as Professor explained before, we have a really big situation with insufficiency of resources and wrong allocation. When we came to the Amazon region, we need to understand that we are not talking only about the effects of climate change on the environment itself, on trees or on animals. We are also talking about the people that live here. So we have a really different perspective than the other regions of the world, because how this financial structure is reaching those communities is essential to understand how those rights are being recognized or guaranteed. And I truly think that this connects really well with my research. At this moment, I'm researching the guarantees of human rights of traditional communities in the carbon markets in the Brazilian Embassy. And in this scenario, we can really see how those resources are being badly allocated, especially because they fail on the guarantee of, as Professor João explained before, territorial rights, financial rights, human rights, and in many cases we have violations related to the access of those resources. So even if we have a specific amount of resources, in many cases they don't achieve the traditional communities that bear the cost of environmental protection. And this specifies how this inequality of the global financial systems reaches the reality of the Amazon region. Beyond this, we have a really well-established recommendation of the private perspective and the inclusion of the financial institutions as catalytic instruments for the implementation of those activities, but at the same time, we still face the same same issue with wrong allocation. Because, for example, the Brazilian Amazon, we only have like 6 to 9 projects in nature-based solutions related to traditional communities. All of the other ones are reaching big companies that in many cases do not translate those activities into decarbonization pathways. So I truly think that way beyond that and all the economic structure and the global overview, this top-down strategies, they are really reaching the wrong allocation strategy, especially when we talk about the Amazon region and the tipping point. The data analysis for the implementation of the calculations of that and also for reducing the inequalities is a really great strategy for providing access to information and at the same time diminish the balance between the access to information and reduce the political inequalities. So it would be something that could be feasible and credibly implemented. However, how this is a one question from what you guys were presenting. I was really curious about how this would help to reduce the political instabilities. Because, for example, for the Amazon region, when we were before all of those political instability with the United States, we had a lot of different resources coming, especially from the third sector, and at the same time the financial institutions after all of those structures of political instabilities, all of those resources were suspended. And all of the activities that were happening here for adaptation or mitigation in specific municipalities, for example, that suffered this flooding, they were completely suspended and all the activities just stopped out of nowhere. So how exactly could strategy like that, data, information, help to reduce those political instabilities in the implementations and the allocations of resources that reach the small regions such as ours? And how, in other ways, all of those different recommendations could help to reduce those inequalities? These are some questions that I'd like to bring to you all, to see if you guys already thought about this, and also to maybe stimulate some debates about the subject. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Professor, and thank you, Anne, right, for this insightful remarks, and of course, thanks to our students. Let us open the floor for any interventions, please, or questions to the panel. Any raised hands from the panel? Any questions? All right, so I'll just give 2 or 3 comments or perhaps additions or elaborations with regards to the TFFF facility. It is amazing, but I just noticed something that is perhaps the core of the problem. This skewed distribution of resources. I'm sure you have noticed that. It says, if we can go back to the slides, it's like 23 billion public resources and 100 billion private resources. This is the core problem with what is happening in climate finance, negotiations and advancement, and what is on the table. What is on the table now, and this is for our students and for everyone interested in climate finance, the problem is that what is happening is there is a deliberate tendency to move climate finance more towards private resources. It's not bad. It's not bad to encourage the private sector to contribute to climate finance, to support blended finance, public partnerships, all this commended work. However, the core of the climate finance must still stay at the responsibility of the governments. Those governments that created the problem initially, the advanced economy, the advanced countries that created the problems originally, towards those countries who are now paying the price. I invite you all to check the work of the Nobel laureate Esther Duflo on that. And she has something very interesting called the moral debt. She calculated in quantifiable terms the debt owed by the advanced economies to lower income countries in terms of, she quantified that, she monetized that in terms of as a compensation for the lost lives that are happening, the mortality that is happening only because of the global warming. One dimension of the climate problem. Let alone, of course, the loss and damage, the floods and everything. We can see one climate event happening, swiping away, taking away years of development. Just exactly like wars and bombs and terrorist attacks. So taking the responsibility in this skewed way to the private sector is unfair. This is another angle of unfairness in the problem. Even here, with all the congratulations to the Triple Fund facility, I still have my conservation of the distribution of the promised resources. So this is the first thing that I wanted to say. Second thing related to, yes, linking the finance with political context is something that it will not change. It's a fact. So yes, it is a fact. What we are calling here, it's the second pillar of the Debt Alliance Lab, is governance and accountability. This is the only way that you can dissect and separate this from the political economy, to have systems, to have governing rules. With reference to the the Zambia, who mentioned Zambia, and Zambia has defaulted on debt, has very climate vulnerable, took loans from the Abraxan Bank. The Abraxan Bank was punished for lending Zambia by downsizing its credit rating to triple B, okay, just because it lent the country and the bank assumed it will have the same treatment as the IMF, as a preferred creditor status. It was not, and it was punished for intervening as a multilateral development bank. So what happened here is pure politics, pure politicizing. The IMF doesn't get punished, but the Abraxan Bank got punished. So politics is everywhere. Systems, we call for applying a system for equal preferred creditor status and for putting the regional development banks at the same and equal foot with the IMF and the World Bank, because they lend in times of crisis, just as the bank does, just as the IMF and the World Bank does. So this is another thing. The third thing is we had a proposal to have this transition period for countries getting out either from a political turbulence or from an income group to another income group. Those countries need to have this transition period where they should maintain the same concessional, the same privileges they used to have when they were in this lower income group or where they were under the political unrest. So one of our proposals in the Debt Alliance Lab is to have this transition period. I think we offered 5 years or something for such countries. It was only for the moving from low for income countries, but let's add to it also, and let's entertain these ideas, countries coming out of disputes, coming out from political events, and so on. This is very interesting, and thank you for drawing our attention to this. Thank you all. I think this was a very fruitful discussion and interaction, and bringing to our Debt Alliance Lab the dimensions of the Amazon and the dimensions we are seeing here on the ground. This was very useful for us, and it will add, we will further develop our communique based on this very constructive insights that we have received from you all. Thank you so much.
Just
Announce the next session.
yes. Okay, just from the logistical side, I think we are kind of a bit on time behind the schedule because there was a break, right? So I don't know if we can get 10 minutes break and then start at 11:40. Is that okay for everyone?
Yes, I think, let's take 10 minutes break. Try to squeeze the next session because we have a hard stop to move to the...
Yes, of course.
Yes, we'll squeeze the next session.
Okay, perfect. See you then.
Oi?
de Santos de Matos, Professor Gustavo Cesar Ribeiro, Dr. Sarah Christian, and Professor Joao Daniel Sa. Now we have the pleasure to listen to our delegates who are going to present their ideas on the just transition.
Hello everyone, my name is Kadra Raswan. I'm a third-year law student at the British University in Egypt, and I was one of the moderators of the Just Transition Lab. I'm not going to talk about the process of the lab and how we created the Online Debt Alliance presentation. I'll let my colleagues discuss this. I want to talk more about the technical part of the lab. I want to tell you that I'm in negotiation rooms and take a look at how the negotiations work, like what is the dynamic, and I also attend the working groups on the Just Transition by UAE that was decided in COP20. Do some reflections on that. So, it was very important, the idea of inclusivity and include people. To include people from all the regions that in our simulation. So we have people from the EU, from Africa, from the Amazon basin, and it's very important because just transition isn't just talking about shifting to renewables, it's talking about shifting the societal ideology from just shifting to renewable energy or green energy to creating social welfare for everybody, creating more green jobs, including renewable energy in our daily lives or in our intake. So it's not just about reducing emissions or adaptation plans, it's changing of the lifestyle of the society. So it's very important when we discuss something like this to include all the people from all over the regions that were represented in the simulation. Another point I want to bring forward is I've heard maybe 6 times yesterday in multiple negotiation rooms, people say that climate action, that human security is the heart of climate action. Climate security is the heart of climate action. And without human security, there won't be climate action because we are rooting for a just and fair and equitable world. Under our lab, we had 3 main pillars. One was human security, the climate security as a human security issue, the one I'm presenting right now. And then my colleague Jumana will discuss the tech transfer, and then our colleague Ratania will discuss the trade and international obligations pillar. So I've mentioned the inclusivity part, and I've mentioned the idea of just transition isn't just about renewables. Another thing I want to mention is we've all seen what the past COP days have established. Like for example, in day 1, they established the Belém Declaration against environmental racism. This was also a point that was brought forward in our lab. I've highlighted some of our recommendations here, unfortunately, because the screen isn't big, I can't show all of it. But we talked about the defining of climate refugees, the defining of climate displacement people, the defining of ecocide under the Rome Statute, and all these sort of mandates that are lacking in current negotiations when it comes to just transition. As I mentioned, I'm a law student, so we had a legal part in our lab focusing on the obligation of states in regarding to the environment or ecocide or human security issues. A couple months back, the RCJ posted its advisory opinion on the obligations of states in regarding to climate change. And under our lab, we suggested to create a new judicial capacity for like an environmental court that prosecutes crimes against the environment. There's already a working group on ecocide. They defined it, but it's not yet defined under the Rome Statute. And for that to happen, there needs to be a certain quorum of 50+1 of the states that are parties to the ICC. However, for this to happen, there's like a lot of legal pathways that need to be taken. But we thought we would introduce the idea of defining ecocide on a domestic scale first, so that then it could get recognition on the international scale. So this just sums up what we discussed mainly, like the main points we discussed in our lab, which was not easy, especially the ecocide point, because there was a lot of divergent, as I said, we had multiple representation. So for example, developed states didn't want to take accountability for the irreversible damage that they did. And this is something that we were calling for as the Just Transition Lab. So there were a lot of, I don't want to say arguments, but there were a lot of different and conflicting points of view when it came to specifically articles that we suggested that had the word accountability or responsibility in them. This declaration, by the way, is posted on our website. You can check it. You won't find the word accountability or responsibility because we didn't get consensus on it, so we couldn't include it. But this is actually what's currently happening in the actual COP2. Yesterday we stayed for 2 hours just discussing one article, and at the end it was bracketed because there was people were arguing on just one terminology. So unfortunately, this is how the real negotiations work. And I'm very proud of this lab because we got to kind of predict what was going to happen in the actual COP. So yeah, I'm going to now leave the floor to my colleague Jumana to discuss the second pillar.
Okay, thank you very much, Mike. My name is Jumana. I am a COP simulation ambassador. I joined the COP simulation 3 years ago, and then I graduated, and now I work in the university. And I had the pleasure of also co-moderating this lab. And there were 3 moderators, and for me, the thing that I wanted to focus on was geopolitics, technology transfer, and global cooperation. And we started this lab with the spirit of advancing equity, rights, inclusion, and human security, and finding solutions that address economic stability and global equity, all the way from safeguarding workers and uplifting vulnerable communities to ensuring that truly no one is left behind. So my focus in the lab was advancing climate security, technology access, and equitable and ethical technology transfer, as well as resource sourcing that is safeguarded from geopolitical interference. While I will quickly go through the things that we agreed upon in this section of the lab, and then I will also be sharing kind of the really important points that I would have truly loved to have included in the communique, but like Becca said, a lot of the developed countries, I think we spent so many hours trying to argue over commas and words, and so disappointingly, the communique is to a large extent vague, but this is very, very similar to how COP negotiations are. You know, at the end of the day, just communiques and documents released are generally vague. But one thing that I really, really was very happy to have agreed upon is intellectual property waivers for critical climate technologies. And I'm specifically happy about this part because I remember back in COP27, we brought this up. So we've been bringing this up this is the 4th year now, and so we finally have something that is agreed on. And intellectual property waivers is super, super important, especially for climate technologies, renewables, hydrogen, water systems, so that we can all have equitable access, and just, you know, decrease the north-south divide in terms of technology. And then I just wanted to bring up some of the points that I wish we could have agreed upon. Right, so I would really like to see specific clauses that call for de-escalating resource competition, so water, arable land, critical minerals for green technology. And again, critical minerals for green technology, we've been calling for this since COP28, I guess maybe next year we'll agree on it. And then it's because all of these things incentivize militarized control. And I think when it came to really hard politics and security issues, I think at the end of the lab, we did not highlight it and stress on it enough, because it was just simply not agreed upon. And that was very, very unfortunate. I also would have liked to see concrete proposals for regional resource sharing accords, demilitarized climate critical corridors, early warning triggers linking resource stress metrics to diplomatic mitigation mechanisms. But again, you know, we had Lebanon calling out for all of these things, and then we had the chief negotiator for the European Union just constantly, you know, raising the plaque. No, no, no. For 3 days in a row. This is just how it went. But you know, I think it's really important that for the next couple of years, we, as the youth, we continue to call out for these things. And I just wanted to conclude by saying that climate action really is inseparable from the protection of human rights and dignity. And we, as the youth, we're not giving up, right? We've been calling for the IP waivers since COP27, and it finally happened this year. So we're going to keep calling out for all of these things in the future, and not just in the simulation and on ground. So, thank you very much. I'd like to now leave the floor to my colleague, Britannia.
Greetings to the honorable panel, esteemed delegates and guests. I am Britannia Dawi, a senior law student at the British University in Egypt, and I'm from Libya, therefore I was the head of delegation of Libya, and I shall be responsible for reflecting on my experience under the international obligations and trade agreements. I believe this is the most important pillar, as there is many issues that we cannot detect liability and accountability, including private corporations, etc. Therefore, reflecting on my experience, since this is a very crucial pillar, I would like to merge my experience to the simulation and to what happened at the COP. And to prevent repetition, I will discuss the main crucial issues. As we were discussing the ICJ's advisory opinion, the ICJ advisory opinion, although it did not discuss or recognize private responsibilities, however, it recognized state responsibilities when it comes to the international agreements, etc. So one of the things and one of the critical debates around the world that is happening, and actually happened at the actual COP, is the liability. Some people say that the ICJ does not have a binding nature, and some say, mention that it has a binding nature. However, I reached to the conclusion that it has a binding nature when it's detected through international obligations and trade agreements, and it's because, and as Professor has mentioned previously, that we need to encourage and emphasize on legal certainty to private corporations. Here, the accountability shall be attributed to the state through the mechanism of the state governing its companies, because it falls under the state, and that's one of the opinions that I have heard and was very creative, because the ICJ advisory opinion is composed through the General Assembly. And one of the things also that I will discuss the problem to provide the outcome that we have reached with is the most favored nation principle in international agreements, which is a cornerstone in the World Trade Organization, which requires that countries do not discriminate between their trading partners. However, I would like to reflect that this principle will conflict and backlash on another principle, which is the principle enshrined under the Paris Agreement, common but differentiated responsibilities. Accordingly, I shall sum up, and our proposal was we seriously propose a re-evaluation of multilateral and plurilateral trade frameworks, including those roles that could include trade organizations and free trade agreements to the future cooperations. Thank you, and now I shall give the floor to my respectful colleague, Mr. Khan.
Hello, my name is Philip Moore. I'm a final year student at the Manchester Metropolitan University and I study politics and international relations. So I'm going to be talking you guys through the first pillar, which is climate security as human security, but in particular from my perspective as the Youngo delegation. For those of you that don't know, Youngo is the youth constituency of the UNFCCC and represents anyone under the age of 35. So a key focus of mine was ensuring that young people can continue their education throughout climate-related disasters to ensure that their future livelihoods are protected going forward. When looking at Pillar 1, we see several policies that were proposed by Youngo. So 1.3, you can just see it here, requests the development of virtual schooling platforms to ensure educational continuity in areas affected by climate impacts. So the idea behind this is essentially that it allows children to continue their education going forward, even in the face of climate adversity, and this secures livelihoods going on. So this policy was proposed to, there was a slight resistance to opening migration routes for young people whose schools might have been destroyed, and instead of would prefer them to be physical school, but as an immediate sort of alternative, it seemed most feasible. One of the policies that, while you could find the development on every single policy you want, and opening migration routes and in other topics like fighting for greater allocation of grants, sometimes it is better to be pragmatic. As Youngo, I didn't really have a position to vote, but I had a position to lobby. And by doing that, having that sort of approach of being pragmatic with it, I think some of the policies that we did get proposed were particularly successful. So we'll just go on to the next one here. Yeah, so 1.6, which encouraged the judicial capacity building programs to strengthen the adjudication of environmental and climate cases for soft law measures. When it comes to capacity building programs, the idea behind this is that it ensured equal climate capacity buildings across the world. Climate literacy programs facilitate informed decision making by increasing knowledge of climate science and impacts of actionable strategies, and they do help identify opportunities, reporting, and improve reporting inconsistencies. So, at the current point, that there are some nations that have particularly strong climate change education curriculums and others that don't, and we sort of wanted to level the playing field to ensure that there wasn't an exacerbation of inequalities between developed and developing nations when it came to capacity building programs. So that was the idea behind that policy. The next one that I had was sort of touching on the points that you decided slightly, and it was encourage parties to align market incentives with accountability frameworks, promoting a green economy through de-risking mechanisms, protection and establishment of 20% reimbursement guarantees for verified sustainable investments. So while most policies I proposed were based on securing education and livelihood security going forward, this policy refers to land protection and making sure that private institutions preserve their land and they extract the minerals from. We're doing this through encouraging sustainable investors and not punishing those who are not. While this policy doesn't prevent ecocide, it does encourage investors to behave responsibly when extracting minerals. And similarly to the Green Jobs Act, the alignment of market incentives helps private sector investors feel secure when acting responsibly. a lot of this comes down to the trouble defining ecocide from a lot of nations. Wasn't that we were going to encourage people to even having the allegation of ecocide thrown at them by having sustainable investments proposed. And this all links quite closely to another policy, which was request parties to integrate green job creation and labour transition frameworks into national legislation, and that was guided by the Philippines Green Jobs Act. You might be wondering how those 2 points are related. The Philippines Green Jobs Act ensured pathways to decent work and social inclusion, and what it did is it aligned market incentives to ensure that they were decent fair pay for the work they were doing. So that was the sort of work that I was doing as in the simulation. It was a really interesting role, mainly purely because I didn't have any voting power, but it was more about lobbying and trying to get things passed which were perhaps a little bit ambitious. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much to our
It's fine.
Thank you very much to our students. And now we have the pleasure and honor to listen to the remarks and insights of Professor Gustavo Cesar Macedora Pinheiro, the coordinator of the postgraduate program in political science department.
Thank everyone for being here. It's a pleasure being here. I would like to express my gratitude for being invited for this speech here today. And I'd like to thank Professor Mariana and also the chair, Sarah. And so I would like to talk with you today about some issues that we are facing here in Brazil regarding two main points. The first one is the disconnect between the preferences between the political elite regarding environmental and climate issues and the people and the public, and also about the threats posed by climate disinformation. So we have just launched a policy brief. I'm a professor here at and a researcher here at UFPA, but I'm also a member of this network of researchers in Brazil that are called that is called the INCT or INCT, which stands for the Center of Technology, and we have the Center of Technology of Science and Technology approaching political representation and democratic legitimacy. And we have just launched this policy brief that we are calling, I don't know if we can present it here.
We are in the process.
We have
process.
Here we go. No problem.
Usually it's working on it together.
So when we are getting, yes, there it is. Thank you. So we are, it is called Brazilian Climate Transition, Legislative, Public Opinion, and Disinformation. We have approached three main topics on that policy brief. The first one is how the legislative how the Chamber of Deputies here in Brazil approach the climate issues and how their action actually have some impact on the emissions here in Brazil. And the second one is a research on public opinion, environmental public opinion in Brazil and in the Amazon region. And the third one is a series of focus groups on climate disinformation. And in the fourth main dimension of that policy brief comprises policy suggestions and advocacy and communication suggestions. So let me briefly talk about those dimensions. There are a team at the HEDEI, which is our network of researchers that they launched this carbon index, this Chamber of Deputies carbon index in Brazil. So by comparing the speeches, the legislation that representatives are pushing in the Chamber of Deputies, by comparing it with some measures of CO2 emissions, they can develop this index that they are calling the carbon index, the legislative carbon index in Brazil. And they have found that most of the representatives in the lower chamber here in Brazil are emitters of greenhouse gases, and that we can see it in that histogram that when you have a positive number on that the index, you are a emitter, and when you have a negative score on that index, you are a mitigator. So, and then they have found interesting findings on that index. The first one is that the main emitters are right-wing representatives, and the main mitigators are left-wing representatives. So, and that also we can see it also by comparing the legislative action of parties here in Brazil, and the same goes for the parties. The most left wise the parties, they become mitigators of when they are in action in the parliament. When you are in a right-wing party, the chances are that you are emitter of greenhouse gases. And also, when you are in the caucus of the agribusiness sector, it increases the chances that you are a highly emitter representative. So that's the face of the representatives in Brazil. But the public, in the next slide, you can see that the public has a different approach to environment and climate in Brazil. So we did that research. I have the honor to be the manager of the environmental public opinion, environmental values and attitudes for the Amazon research. And we have asked the Brazilian public about some issues on environment and climate change questions. So the first one that we can see in the graph in the top of the slide is the trust in the environmental agency, Brazilian environmental agency, the main environmental agency, which is called the IBAMA. So people in Brazil tends to trust in IBAMA. You know, you can see that about 55% of Brazilians trust in some way in the IBAMA. In the lower part of this slide, we can see a graph that we have asked Brazilians about their preferences on policies regarding environmental and climate issues. So we can see that when you ask Brazilians about if Brazil must increase the use of pesticides or to allow for mining on indigenous lands or to privatize the sanitation services, the Brazilian public is overwhelming against it. You know, you can see that, for instance, about 76% of Brazilians are against the expansion of pesticides in Brazil. But when you ask about the protection of indigenous and quilombolas lands, people in Brazil are mainly they support that type of policy. So I'm going to share with you for the last part of my speech here is that we also have approached, we have a team which is led by Professor Luciana Veiga, which was our last Brazilian Association, Political Science Brazilian Association president, and she led this this group that approached different types of groups by doing focus groups. They showed a piece of misinformation, a video with misinformation, climate misinformation content, and then they asked the people in the focus group about what they think about it. So, and we can say that people in the focus groups, they are likely to have some kind of cognitive dissonance on that, because people, when people saw the video, people in the focus groups, they assumed that the information there was true, and they also reported that they were willing to share that type of information with their counterparts. But when you ask if they agree with that type of content, we have a split. Half of the respondents say that they don't agree with that type of content, and half agree with that type of content. So we have some kind of cognitive dissonance, and that cognitive dissonance is more pronounced in the lower classes, lower social classes, and lower education cohorts. So we have, for the wrap up, we have a Brazilian public which is pro-environmental. They are well informed about environment and climate issues, but we have some the misinformation can enter the Brazilian public through that type of content, and this is a threat that is not well established right now here in Brazil, but it can be a threat in the future. We can, if the climate misinformation in Brazil is, tends to be more organized, they can reach that type of public that, despite think that the Amazon is important, the climate is changing, they can agree and see as a true piece of evidence something that is actually misinformation. So we have these contradictions here in Brazil. Representatives that are most likely to be anti-environmental, a public that is more likely to be pro-environmental, but that same public has some it can be affected by misinformation when the right type of misinformation hits them in their daily lives. So the last part, to finish, we have some recommendations on policies and advocacy and communication strategies, and I can speak about them later if you want. But in a nutshell, that's the type of work we are doing here. And I think that when we are discussing the information, the integrity of climate information, that this COP is the COP that discussed the integrity information on climate change in a most precise and focused way, when we think that it is important for a just transition and a more safe world in terms of climate change mitigation. We have to deal with climate misinformation and climate integrity, information integrity. So that's the type of evidence that we can bring to that conversation. So thank you, and I look forward to this.
Thank you very much, Professor, for your very interesting and insightful remarks and research. It is now my pleasure to leave the floor to Professor Joan Danielissa for the closing remarks.
Thank you very much. First, I will give the words to Mariana.
Thank you, João. Thank you, Gustavo, for the wonderful presentation. This is not part of the protocol, but just like to say 2 remarks on the works presented. First, I was very surprised to hear the reference to ecocide. Like, I don't know how you got this decision. I was really amazed. So congratulations for doing that. And the second thing is actually a news. I just received that and I would like to share here. I'm at the working group on human rights and climate change at COP30 together with other organizations and universities, and I just received the text that the United Arab Emirates Just Transition Work Program includes reference in the preambular part and in 2 different provisions to human rights. So actually, we are on the way to adopt on Friday decisions under the Just Transition Program that make explicit reference to human rights. So I think it's a huge achievement for us here in Belém. And your discussions, I'm sure, reflect the way that we are debating human rights and climate change here at COP30. So congratulations, well done, really fantastic work. Very, very, very happy to have heard your voices and to know that you are discussing the most relevant issues that have appeared here at COP30. Congratulations.
think she should close the session. Really good speech. I just want to thank you all for being here. Thanks Professor Gustavo, Dr. Sarah, and Dr. Mariana, Dr. Gustavo also, because it was such a nice morning, and I had the chance to say that, but I was really impressed with your work, because I know you are developing your knowledge and trying to work on some kind of simulation. I had my first experience as it was in a mood court competition also, a long time ago was my first experience. I was in New York doing an LLM, and I was invited to participate in a mood court, and I was thinking it's going to happen in a way, and it turned into another way. And I had to represent a small island, talking on behalf of them, and was a climate issue also. So was really interesting for me to do the exercise, and that's the kind of thing I think we can do to improve our knowledge. And I hope you still work on it. And I know you have time to go to Blue Zone maybe, or to another appointment. So I just want to say that we are really happy to have you. We are going to find a way to work together. I don't know how, but definitely we have to work together. We have a clinic here that works on mood court competitions, also human rights, and maybe we can talk later to see how can we work together and to have some kind of agreement. I'm representing PPGD, that's the post-graduation program, but I can give you one information. One of my best friends is in the prorector sector, so I can talk to him and ask for some kind of agreement, and he will help us to get this. Thank you very much.
Can we have a group photo?
Yes.